So first of all, welcome everyone to Omobono's webinar, How to Create an Effective Employer Brand. I want to first thank you all for coming and attending, spending some time with us. We really do appreciate it. So this is Omobono's first webinar in our webinar series. We plan to have one each month with a new specialist and topic. So next month, we'll have Jen Henning, who is our Senior Experience Specialist, and she will be talking about designing delightful experiences. So we hope to see you back for that on April 25th. Just so you know, this is being recorded, so in case you have to leave early, you can always get this later. We will also be sending this out immediately afterwards. But if you can stick around, there'll be a Q&A session at the end. So feel free to submit any questions you might have. You can do this by going to the questions panel on the right-hand side. I'll be tracking this and making sure all questions get answered. So now let's hear a little bit about our speaker. Philip Black has a 19-year track record of helping business leaders achieve their full potential. At Omobono, Philip is our head of strategy here in the U.S. He leads brand and digital strategy for client engagement. He's worked with large organizations that span different industries. Some of them include BP, JLL, Motorola Solutions, Marsh McLennan, and others. I will now hand things off to Philip so we can get started.
Thanks for that intro, Alexa. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining again today. I'd like to actually begin with a question. And the question is, how well understood is your employer brand within your organization today? So we're going to go ahead and launch the poll here and give it just a minute. Thanks, yeah. So go ahead and click that in. We'll give it just 30 seconds to a minute here to get some results from you. Go ahead and pop in your answer there. All right, looks like about half of us have voted so far, going strong. 70%. All right, great. Looks like we've got most everyone has weighed in on this, and it looks like let's go ahead and share those results. So here's what we see here. So it looks like a good chunk of us are in we don't have an employer brand yet, so we're going to learn a lot today. Most of us fall in the second category. We have an employer brand, it's not necessarily used often. So that's interesting. I think then the basis of our conversation today will be around how do we upgrade that employer brand? How do we give it more legs and a little bit more power moving forward? So we're going to cover a good range of topics today, and what we are going to do is have questions throughout the session. If you have questions, feel free to throw them in the question box, and of course at the end we're going to have some time for Q&A. So thanks everybody. Let's go ahead and move forward. All right, so employer branding. We're going to talk a little bit about the wider context around it. Our objective today is to provide you with real-world, useful, practical information in this session. The idea is to save you time in the process. There's a lot to cover, but I'm going to look to move quickly through all of it, and again, leave some time for discussion at the end. I think it's worth just a quick introduction to Omobono for those who don't know us. We are a global technology and creative agency. We work with the world's biggest organizations, Google, Facebook, just to name a few, many of the organizations Alexa's shared before. We've delivered significant employer branding and recruitment work for really notable enterprise companies that are pushing the envelope. And many of those lessons we're going to share here today. Last year, we were cited as Agency of the Year for the second year in a row. And I think the reason for that is because we focus on people, not the product. And I think that's fundamentally important to brands. We understand the value of people inside the organization and outside the organization. That's really part of what helps brands work. So that's just a bit about us. We're going to cover some things today. We're going to look at the talent environment. What is an employer brand? We're going to define that a little bit. We're going to, of course, dig into some real life lessons derived right from our work with enterprise clients. We're going to look at the idea of investing. What's the case, the business case for bottom line versus longer term investing, and then aligning your employer brand with your corporate brand. Of course, time for Q&A at the end. So looking at the overall context, what we are in the midst of a lot of societal change. We have disruption all around us. Technology and data is really a part of the public conversation. We all know the world around us is changing rapidly. And as the world becomes more complex, deep currents of change are really reshaping business at the structural level. And today, more than ever, companies really need to adjust to be nimble, to be adaptable in the face of changing environments. In fact, many of the large organizations we work with are trying to figure out how to, act and behave in a smaller, more agile fashion. So at the same time that's going on, the concepts of workplace, workforce, work itself is changing, and that requires a new breed of leaders. Companies need new skill sets, and they're looking for a much more diverse range of talent today. So truly, we've entered into a new era of the human capital-centric economy. Talent and culture now sit right at the heart of competitive advantage. So think about it. If your company needs new talent to respond to future challenges and opportunities, and if you don't have the right people, you as an organization are weaker, and your hiring competition will have them, making them stronger. So that's a double loss for you. Hopefully that gets a sense for the importance of what we're talking about today. So companies really need to be able to move fast, acquire new skills and leadership to succeed today and in the future. Speaking of today, this is not something that we can really just blink at. 40% of employers globally are having difficulty filling positions. That is according to Manpower Group. So leading companies like Google, Salesforce, BlackRock, GE, just to name a few, that's why they're so ruthless and why they spend so much time on an investment on talent. What they know is that the battle is truly won or lost based on the quality of people they have in their company. Hiring the very best and brightest translates directly into competitive advantage. So let's expand on the dilemma. Many of us here we sit within a particular industry. And so how we typically look at our talent challenge is within that industry context. We are a company within an industry, so we're competing against a certain limited amount of options within the context, right? Well, the reality is that hiring conditions have changed. And let's pretend you're trying to attract business graduates. Your hiring competition is vastly broader than you think it is today, especially where digital skills are in demand, which it seems to be across the board. According to Forbes 2017 research, we need to go far beyond the expected players like the Big Four, financial services, some of the big firms. You're up against Amazon, Walt Disney, Google, and even the FBI. So how do you even begin to compete? These companies have humongous brands, reputations, not to mention their budgets are simply massive. What is someone in HR, talent, or recruitment marketing, what are they going to do? How do you even begin to compete? Well, talent leaders, 8 out of 10 of them say that employer branding is a secret weapon. It has a significant impact on their ability to hire great talent. In fact, LinkedIn reports that it's the #1 area they'd like to invest in over the next year. And the reason for that is that today, relationships are so important, and your people truly, more than ever, your people are your brand. We're going to talk a little bit more about that with some research we have towards the end of the webinar. But research shows that organizations' overall ambition to invest in their employees, whatever that means, whether that's programs or training, it's actually astoundingly low. It's just shocking, but again, we're going to talk more about that later. People are your brand. So whether you're in talent, recruiting, HR, marketing, each of you have a huge contribution to the overall brand experience for your company, not just of employees and candidates, but prospects and customers as well. So there truly is an effect on the actual commercial impact of your business. So before we go any further, I would like to just take a few moments to anchor some definitions in our mind around employer brands. I know many of us within the marketing world use some of these terms quite frequently, and it's important to kind of avoid the illusion of understanding, really get to it. So some simple definitions that I'll expand on throughout the webinar today. Very, very simple. Your employer brand, what is it? It is who you are. as an organization. Your employee value proposition is what you offer to employees, to talent, to prospects. And your employee experience overall is really the sum of the experiences that your candidates and your employees have throughout their engagement at your company, whether that's 8 months or 8 years or 15 years. The employee experience spans the full gamut, not just the candidate experience. So one of the questions that we often are asked is, is the employer brand the same thing as a corporate brand? Are they one and the same? Should it be? We would say that there are both similarities and differences. Let's unpack this a little bit. As far as similarities, employer branding is very similar to external corporate branding. And of course, it needs to align with corporate branding. So you're not saying one thing outside the company and a completely different thing inside the company. External branding today is now focused on the end-to-end customer experience. We're talking from the very first contact online to face-to-face interactions with people in the company. It seems like every operational element of the company, marketing, operations, HR, they all come together to form that customer experience. And that's why you see large firms like Accenture Interactive, they're now calling themselves customer experience companies. I'm sure that's something we've come across. Now, brands today really, truly need to manage the whole customer experience and every touch point along the way, from the inception of an idea to developing and designing a product, building awareness, and then selling and distributing it. And by the way, many organizations lean on agency partners to really help them understand all of the touch points of a customer experience. So in that sense, just like in external branding, for employer brands, you really need to identify what you stand for, turn it into a compelling message, deliver it on all the channels that will reach people effectively. And just like a corporate brand, an employer brand is the same thing as candidate and employee experience, which if you think about it is the same thing as customer experience. So if brands today are about the experience, the candidate experience is truly something that is meant to connect with and build your employer brand. So it's a different type of customer. It's one that chooses to exchange their time with you instead of give you their money for a product or a service. And just to drive this point a little bit further, in case you think customer experience is a fad, Forrester research shows that 89% of companies expect to compete primarily on customer experience by 2020. So that's a big deal. This is not going away anytime soon. And by the way, if this is something you want to dig into further, definitely tune in to our next webinar that Jen Hennings is going to be leading on customer experience, where we will learn a lot more about that. So that's how employer brands are similar to corporate brands, is that it's all about the experience. It's a holistic experience. And then let's talk about the differences. So before we talk about the difference between a corporate brand and an employer brand, let's put a definition on what is a brand. There's lots of definitions out there. Here's a simple one that we like to use. A brand, quite simply, is a bridge. It's an active, vital connection between people and a company. So when we think about your corporate brand, it's really designed to connect your business to its customers. It offers customers a clear pathway back to your business, and it really differentiates you from all of your competition, centered on that brand promise, right? So we've got our corporate brand, and then we've got our employer brand. And your employer brand really connects your business to key talent audiences. It really enables those audiences to connect back to your company, and it differentiates and distinguishes your business from other employers. So if we look at the differences, they're meant to be really distinct, but they support each other. They're related. They really communicate a promise, but it's to different audiences. However, it is all about connecting your company to people. So if your employer brand helps talent see what you offer and they believe in it, they're going to hop on board to really help deliver that moving forward. So hopefully these definitions here have helped give some context around employer brands, what they are, and their importance. What I'd like to do is take just a quick, another quick poll here on really the effectiveness of employer brands. So many of us have one. Again, half of us out there have one. A good chunk of us also said that our employer brands resonate with employees. So let's just talk about how effectively do our employer brands inspire employees. So we've got the poll right up there on the screen. So if we'll take just a minute, if you don't mind leaning forward, give us your input on employer brands, that would be awesome. All right. Less than 30 seconds and 70% of people have voted, 80%. You guys are rock stars. All right, we're going to go ahead and close the poll and share those results. All right, so it sounds like a third of us feel like it's somewhat effective, whereas a solid, almost 50%, 44% there feel like it's middle of the road. So I think that kind of syncs up with what we were hearing from the very first poll. And then we've got a good, 20-some% that feel that it is pretty highly effective. So that's great. It sounds like we really have a range of folks here on this webinar today with different experiences. Great. So looking at that, it sounds like we can dial up the effectiveness of our employer brand. Let's actually take a moment to look at some real life lessons. So we're going to go ahead and hide the poll itself. Thanks for participating. And again, if you have questions at all, feel free to throw them through the question feature in GoToWebinar there, and we'll make sure to address that. So don't be shy. And of course, we're going to have some Q&A at the end, but if the feeling strikes you, don't hold back. So before we look at some real life lessons here, I think what's important is to know that what we're going to share is going to be a little bit further down the line. Suffice it to say, when you create an employer brand, it's really important that some fundamental building blocks are in place. For instance, you need to begin with some research, not just internal research, not just who we say we are as a brand, but also, does that connect with potential candidates? Does it connect with the ideal types of people that we're looking to attract to our business? Because your employer brand shouldn't just connect with candidates, neither should it just connect with current employees. It needs to do both. So I cannot stress how important doing some research to make sure that your employer brand is rooted in some insight is critical. Then you need to formulate a strategy. Once you have some insights, you need to build a strategy on that. How will you reach? What are the right messages? What are the levers that we need to pull and to connect with? What types of things do we need to change in our employee experience overall to make an employer brand really come to life? And then, of course, from a marketing standpoint, from a brand standpoint, defining the visuals, the tone of voice. What do we sound like? What do we look like? And then bringing it to life through deliverables and touch points. I wanted to stress this because so many of our clients and customers, with the stakeholders they deal with, oftentimes there's a push to just get right deliverables and touch points. And what we would like to encourage you to think about is if you're going to invest in those deliverables, those touch points, if you're going to be propagating your brand out there, it is best to do that based on solid foundation of insights and a strategy before you just jump into tactics. So what we're going to do is share some things throughout the life cycle, but I wanted to at least give you this as a backdrop so you know that all of these things have happened before some of these lessons that we're going to share. The very first thing that we're going to talk about is bringing the power of purpose to every single day. Regardless of what industry you're in, it is so critical to really link the company's purpose to the daily actions of your team, of your employees. I think that is so fundamentally important. To bring this to life, here's an example. Johnson & Johnson, they've done a great job linking what people do in their day-to-day roles with the wider mission of Johnson & Johnson. So Johnson & Johnson is a company that most of us are familiar with. They truly are a company centered around caring for people. And as a part of that, they have some really audacious goals. Curing cancer, Alzheimer's, basically eradicating the world of its greatest ills. And this company touches 1 billion lives every day. So that is a big, big impact. So these 3 simple words are really at the heart of their employer value proposition. One person closer. It really creates a connection. It connects what talent acquisition, for instance, does to bring Johnson & Johnson closer to cures and breakthroughs. For instance, they could be hiring that next scientist that cures cancer. And it really communicates to employees the value, the potential. even the promise that every single hire brings on. So this can be really brought into play, for instance, an employee referral program. You are helping us get one person closer to a cure for Alzheimer's, or you're helping us get one marketer closer to communicating with people. So this is an example of really connecting an employer value proposition or your employer brand with the purpose of the organization. And you can see the power of that statement. It's 100% on strategy for corporate brand as well as talent, and it can be used all throughout activation, which J&J has done a fantastic job. Now, your organization may not have as let's say mission critical of a purpose. It might be something that's a lot lighter, but I guarantee you that a purpose exists, even if it's making someone's life a little bit easier, if it's affecting your customer in some way. So I encourage you to really push in and find what is your company's purpose, and then make sure to bring that to life in your employer brand. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, but that's kind of lesson one. Is if you're going to create an employer brand, bring the power of your purpose, to it every single day. The second lesson we're going to look at is really your digital body language. And these lessons really build on one another. Your employee experience that we talked a lot about earlier, it really, again, begins with that candidate experience, the very, very first touch points. So if you can imagine, if it's your very first impression, you want to make it as progressive as your organization is. Either way, you want to make it on brand. However your organization is really positioning themselves, the touch points need to reflect that. In this case, we were working with a global energy company. They really wanted to leapfrog their competitors in terms of a digital candidate experience in the next 3 years. But like many of us, like most of us, I would argue, their current infrastructure, their technology behind it, their social media was disjointed and, quite frankly, rather outdated. So what we did is we investigated trends in the market. We looked inside recruitment, outside of recruitment, and put together an overarching digital strategy. And when that was in place, we took each pillar and really developed a 3-year roadmap for how to bring it to fruition. Some of the things that it affected would be their global social channels, LinkedIn, Facebook, job boards, campus events and ambassadors, their employee referral program, which for this organization accounts for over 25% of their global hires. The graduate as well as expert hires, the career website. You want to think about all of these touch points because these are your digital body language, right? This is how you express your digital body language. If it doesn't look like your organization, then something's wrong. If you're trying to attract, for instance, the best and brightest minds, then you need to think about your front line as truly reflecting that. By the way, don't forget email communications. Much of our work and research has revealed that email, even though it's kind of like a, quote, dusty old medium in terms of digital, is critically important. So don't forget that touch point. And of course, your talent communities, talent pool, people that are in the pipeline. So your digital body language really needs to reflect your organization's character. Why is that important? Well, let's look at your audience today. Your talent audience today is very different than what it has been in the past. So let's explore this a little bit. This is a picture of what they look like today and what they're increasingly going to look like in the future. So this gives us some clues as to how our customer experience or candidate experience should really be catered to these folks. First of all, they're online learners. They're increasingly used to online tools, whether that's MOOCs or video-based learning. Heck, even LinkedIn has its own learning tools with their acquisition of Lynda. They're feedback junkie. There's a desire for continuous feedback. The once-a-year review or even quarterly review doesn't work. In fact, a little side note, that's one of the things that we've been working on is developing an application called Taltrack to get and give employee feedback in a very rapid fashion throughout the year. So feedback junkies. Transactive memory. So in fact, the need to memorize things is going away. Many people rely on Google, search engines, other wikis, really, heck, Siri and Alexa, for that matter, to really feed us instant answers. Activist consumers, that's a big thing. I mean, we see this even just in the past weeks, around some of the big, technology companies. Employee as well as the employer relationship is fundamentally changed. These activist consumers want to see organizations doing well, and they will call it out when it isn't. There's just a different social contract with employees and employers. It's kind of not the big brother, kind of attitude anymore. It's much more of a collaborative relationship. And of course, there's such a high visual preference. Digital technology, our mobile phones, our smartwatches, now what we could see is that we've been trained to see and understand good design over and over. So that preference is really baked in. So if you have something that's kind of crusty or just doesn't feel right, your candidates are really going to turn up their nose, or that's going to be something they're going to be thinking about. Some of their decisions are all, they're made with friends within their network. The whole, rating sites, looking at Glassdoor, checking with friends. It's very much of a social decision making. Personalization, people expect completely, personalized experience. Anything from a high-end monogrammed Burberry bag to automated, emails. So marketing automation, which we'll talk about in a minute. And of course, they're looking for balance. Their mindfulness. In fact, there's even almost a de-teching trend that we see today. So balance is super important to candidates and employees today. And really friction intolerant. So this gets back at that whole customer experience. If your customer experience, if your user experience is really kind of inefficient, that's really going to speak volumes about your organization. So this is what we need to think about in terms of our audience today. The next lesson that we should look at is that your customer experience really is going to require a high level of emotional intelligence. What you could see from what we just shared, your audience expects, again, that really high level of customer experience. And so now your digital strategy not only needs to support that, it needs to support an employer brand, and it needs to be really tuned in to where people are at. Here's an example of that. Johnson & Johnson, again, just creating something that's really, really neat out there. Their Shine effectively is a candidate portal whereby you can actually log in and see where you're at with the process. It coaches you along the way. It provides important resources, throughout the process, so that way you have visibility of your candidacy, throughout the actual application and interview process. So to do something like that right, and we'll talk about that a little bit more and dig into that example, it's important that you understand a candidate's emotional journey. Here's an example of mapping out the emotional state of candidates throughout their journey and really identifying where we can improve the experience throughout. Up front, there might be excitement and nerves as they look to apply for the job or see if a friend works there. When they don't hear back for days or weeks, there's a sense of growing irritation or vulnerability. Once an interview is actually scheduled, there could be the sense of feeling powerless, like who am I meeting with? How can I learn a little bit more about them? Or if, for instance, that interview gets rearranged, which it often does with large organizations, how is it communicated? Is it just kind of told, or are options provided? It definitely is important to understand what your candidate's emotional journey is. And that, again, is what this example here does really well. This example really sits at the heart of many of the problems associated with candidate experience. The great showcase of why Johnson & Johnson is a really progressive talent leader. As we know, again, the application process for most organizations is broken. Companies spend millions of dollars on customer experience. And so we need to ask ourselves, is the candidate experience reflective of what we're promising? So the candidate process often is this black box. You spend an hour filling out a form, uploading a resume, entering in past position details or education, and then you may never hear back from them. Or more likely, you'll get an automated response saying that you may or may not ever hear back from a person. It's kind of, thanks a lot. I appreciate that. Now, can you imagine if we treated customers that way? If we had a prospect reaching out to us and they got an automatic email saying, you may or may not hear from someone in the next 30 days. We appreciate your time. Have a nice life. Your talent, your employees, your candidates, these are the people that are going to be driving your strategy forward. And you have to remember, for every yes, for every person that we say that we accept into our organization, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of no's that need to be delivered. So what this example does well is there's a 5-stage progress tracker, sets expectations, it lets you know where you're at in the process, kind of like FedEx, but not quite overnight, right? If a candidate's rejected, at least they understand how the whole process works. It's not a very opaque process. And, they're at least a little bit better prepared due to the interview guide, some of the helpful articles, they can actually do better in their next pursuit. And you can imagine that that's a positive experience. They're going to tell their friends about it. They're going to feel better about the Johnson & Johnson brand the next time they buy shampoo or Band-Aids or medicine. And that really has ramifications on both the employer brand as well as that external brand. Especially, again, when you think about some, turning away hundreds of thousands of interviews every single year, those are opportunities to make an impression as an overall brand. Don't forget, people do come back over time. The next example we're going to look at was for a global pharma company. And one of the things we looked at was, okay, marketing automation. It's something that we're quite familiar with. If we put something in our basket on Gilt or other shopping sites and we don't complete the transaction, we get a reminder email a little bit later, maybe a discount code. Or if we make a purchase of something, we get a little how-to user guide, a 5-step user guide spaced out over a series of days or weeks. Really helps us dig into what we've bought and really helps us enjoy our purchase a little bit more. What if we took that thinking and we actually applied that to our employer branding? So for this global company, this is again built on the insight that modern consumers really have this liquid expectations. They want real-time updates on everything, and kind of the slow-burning recruitment process doesn't work. Referrers as well as referees, for an employee referral program, we're waiting weeks for any update on their status in the process. So by linking a marketing automation system to this process, they'd automatically receive updates on candidates on every stage of the process as well. Referrals would receive a nudge, moving forward, and referees would get a sense for where they're at with the process. These are automatically generated emails that really help to move people along the process, much more effective than simply kind of a once and done email. And then it allows referrers to really coach people that they're bringing into the system. They can reach out, they can say, hey, Jane, I see that you haven't applied for that, or there's one more detail that you're missing here. You might want to think about that. Or if there's an upcoming interview, hey, Bob, I know that you're going to be meeting a little bit later this week. Here's a few things to keep in mind. So it really just is a much better way to keep people in the loop as they go through that candidate experience. And again, bringing that employer brand to life in so many different smaller touch points. So the next example we're going to look at, and this is the last one here, hopefully you can see there's been a bit of a build, kind of moving from the inside to your outside touch points here. A global consulting firm we were working with recently went through a rebrand. And what we found is that the recruitment marketing folks were wrestling with how to communicate that rebrand as well as the value proposition of the workplace itself. And so what we looked to do was actually create a toolkit. What we found is that recruiters are really the front line of your brand. They're not only representing your employer brand or the job itself or the position or the group, but they're representing your corporate brand. So what you want to think about is actually equipping your recruiters, really investing in them with training, with assets, whether that's kind of a sizzle reel video that really communicates your brand in a consistent way, or different presentation materials, things that they might use on campus or within job fairs. So what you want to think about is really priming your people to launch. It's important not to assume that people know how to communicate about your employer brand. So whether you sit in HR or you sit in marketing, it's really critical to bring the minds together to really communicate that brand in a consistent way and provide tools, training, and resource for people, throughout the process. So again, your recruiters are your front line. How can we better equip them? Because it's not just about the channels that are floating out there, but your people, which are so influential and so important in that process. In fact, much of our research has shown that one of the most important people in the process are your recruiters. They're the most influential in your candidates actually making a decision. So it's not just sort of a nice to have, it is a must have. So those are lessons that we've learned working with enterprise organizations that are really pushing, the envelope. Hopefully there's some things that we can take away and utilize within our own organizations, or maybe something to think about and discuss internally. Again, if you have questions throughout, feel free to throw those into the chat window. We're now going to really look at building the business case for an employer brand. And I know that this is something that many of us struggle with, is how do we get buy-in on the investment required to really build out an employer brand, and how is that going to really be reflected with return on investment. So according to LinkedIn's research, their 2017 report, executives said that they had allocated only 8% of their recruiting budgets to employer branding. Now that's kind of surprising, but let's talk about the cost savings. Let's just start with saving money first. Workforce costs, pension costs, hiring costs, they are some of the biggest that any organization faces, right? When it comes to hiring costs, companies with strong employer brands only need to spend half as much as other companies. So let's say it costs $5,000 to hire an employee for your company. If you build your employer brand, you're going to save $2,500 per hire. So investing in that employer brand is going to really save you money in the long run on a per person basis. Then think about retention. A strong employer brand means 28% less turnover within your organization. That's really huge, especially when you consider that it costs the company 6 to 9 months of salary to replace an employee. That really adds up. Now that's just the money side of things. Think about the hit on productivity, on morale, within the organization. That stuff cannot even be measured, right? So it's up to us who work within HR or talent to really make the business case for for employer branding. People aren't going to do it for us. The business is not going to ask for it from us. It's something that if we're going to be taken seriously, we need to make sure that we come with some real numbers and research around this. So that's just cost savings. Now let's talk about revenues. Now, Harvard Business Review, little publication, a few of us might have heard of before, their research shows that companies with engaged employees generate twice as much revenue, 4 times the profit, and have double the client satisfaction of those that don't. Now, what we're not promising you is if you create an employer brand, you're instantly going to have engaged employees. That is obviously a much more complex picture to create employee engagement, but we can tell you an employer brand is a central part of employee engagement. It's a really key ingredient. So if we can affect revenues just a little bit, if we can impact these numbers just a little bit, that is a huge contribution to the business, right? So there's cost savings as well as revenue boost when we invest in our employer brand. Every year, Omobono does research into digital trends, into marketing. And the last couple of years, we've looked at the intersection of marketing as well as HR, and a few bits that I wanted to bring forward here when we think about our employer brand. And again, making the business case, because that's what this kind of part of the conversation is all about. What we've learned is that a customer is 33% more likely to hear from somebody else within the company than from marketing. So that means that marketing, where traditionally we've thought of marketing and sales as really controlling the voice or the brand of the company, what we now know is that that is not the case. So if we invest in our employer brand, people are more likely to be singing from the same song sheet to give a consistent brand message to customers. In fact, what we've learned is that HR is now the second most powerful digital voice in the organization, just after marketing. So this is ahead of service, customer service, sales, even the board. So HR really has a ton of power today with regards to your digital channels. That's really, really important. There's the whole saying of with much power comes, or with much responsibility. Never mind, I botched that, so I'm just going to move on. The point is that HR has a lot of responsibility, and that you actually have a significant impact. And then the last kind of bit of research that we wanted to surface is that while employer branding is so important, only 18% of marketers really had the value of employer brand as one of their KPIs. So the point is that there's a vacuum of influence, and there's a huge opportunity for us to improve this space. This is something we really should be excited about. Employer brands aren't just a nice to have. This is really essential to us doing business and doing it well and getting the right talent in the digital age. So I think hopefully this has really given us some things to think about in terms of our business case for employer brands. Again, I think we need to think about that right now. This is an opportunity for us in HR and talent, in marketing and recruitment marketing, to think about making a commercial impact. There's a wide open space for us that we can really step forward. It's something we should be excited about, something we should really reach out and grasp. So the last bit we're going to look at today in closing is really how do we align our employer brand? And there's a lot that we can say around this. There's a lot of examples that we've covered. I think it comes down to two fundamental questions that you want to ask yourself and really work through. First one is, what does your company promise to deliver? What exactly is that offering, that service that you promise to deliver? And then you want to look at, what do people who want to deliver that same thing look like, right? So here's a couple examples of that. Johnson & Johnson, General Electric, Sam Adams, some different pieces here. Johnson & Johnson wants to deliver healthcare breakthrough. So Johnson & Johnson needs to look for people that want to deliver the same. General Electric wants to better society through technology and engineering. So let's look for people that have that same blend of skills and vision. Then Sam Adams, they're all about being unique, being independent in a world of large beer, brands, and being fun. And so they're looking for people that are looking to deliver the same experience, the same type of thing. So this gives us a clear way for us to look at how we align our employer brand and find people that are looking to deliver the same type of thing that we want to deliver. In closing, I think when we've talked through a lot of examples today and really a lot of rationale for why we should be investing and practically how to create an effective employer brand. I think it's important to know that we're not alone in this, and that if we don't invest here, we're missing a trick. Jeff Bezos, CEO of Amazon, says it's the single most important element of Amazon.com success. Not their servers, not their geographical footprint, acquiring Whole Foods. It's their people, it's their talent. And this is obviously a very well-known, growing, dynamic tech organization. So talent comes first. We should absolutely be thinking about our employer brand. And again, it all comes back to commercial impact. It is within grasp. We within HR, within talent, within recruitment marketing can make a massive impact on our businesses. And the time for us to do that is now. So hopefully we've picked up some good tips along the way. Don't forget, coming up in just a few short weeks, we're going to be talking about a customer experience a little bit more. Jen, our expert, will be diving into designing delightful experiences. And what we'd like to do now is really transition to a time of Q&A. So thank you for joining us, and the lines are open. Go ahead and pop your question in the questions meter here. And I see we've got two right here to start off with. So the first question is, we'd like to know how to package an employer brand that is strong but not packaged, or a story that connects to our people. So let's talk about that. This organization, they have an employer value proposition, but we don't know how to get people engaged. That is a fantastic question. So I think I'm going to try to address that, and probably not perfectly, but we can always follow up if we need to. So oftentimes this gets at the digital body language. If we have a message that really resonates, in this case, it sounds like you have a strong message. It resonates with people, but it's not packaged. What you want to think about are getting a pulse on where are the key touch points. Is it Glassdoor? Is it your career website? If, for instance, you're trying to attract early talent, then your social media channels are going to be really important. And by the way, don't forget Instagram, a highly visual medium in there. So what you want to do is perform some research, not just internally, but externally. Who are the types of candidates that you're trying to attract, whether it's executive or experienced hires, or again, early talent? Do some research, find out where those key touch points are. and then create a list of low-hanging fruit. Begin to affect those touch points first. So that's one way to do it. I would also really encourage you to do some training internally. So if you have something that works, how well and how effectively do you have a training package? Whether that's a simple presentation that is done as a roadshow or even a webinar just like this, where you gather together all of your heads of talent, recruiting, HR, and you talk through and share what are the keys of your employer brand. Remember, it is not once and done. People forget things quite quickly. So this would be something you'd want to perform on a bi-monthly or quarterly basis, or when you bring in new people into the organization, particularly on the talent side, making sure you go through that training so that's a part of people's hearts and minds. So just a few tips on that. Do research, make sure it's not just internal to find your top touch points, and then make sure that you do some training as well so it doesn't just live in a few people's heads, but in everyone's heads. And by the way, see if you can partner with marketing on that to really bring that to life. Again, this is kind of like an unowned area right now, but HR is that second most powerful voice digitally. Bring that together with marketing. So hopefully that helps, and feel free to put in another one in there. Next question we have here is, how do you measure if your employer brand is working? That is a fantastic question, because in the end of the day, if we can't prove back to the business, then I think we some of this work can be considered futile. Okay, so I'm just going to cut right to the chase. In the end of the day, we need to see your retention figures increasing, right? Because that speaks to the idea that you are retaining the talent that you have right now. Okay, so retention numbers need to be increasing, right? So one of the stats we shared a little bit earlier is that a strong employer brand means 28% less turnover. We should see those figures changing, and I think what we do need to do, though, is give ourselves a little bit of runway. Remember that rolling out an employer brand one week does not yield results the next. I think we, realistically need to see 6 months, 9 months, a year to really see some of those things changing. That is going to be a significant indicator. The other one is another significant indicator is going to be the length of time between an initial engagement with a candidate and offer acceptance. I think that's going to be really important to see if your employer brand is working. If that time is decreasing, that tells us that, obviously there are some factors in there such as your interview process, but it tells us that your employer brand is being more effective in delivering and communicating what your brand is all about. I would say so that's another factor for us to look at is the time speed to hire. Another critical measure, and there are many, is going to be the quality. If you measure the quality and skill level of candidates coming in today versus coming in a year from rolling out your employer brand, you should see a measurable difference in the quality of candidates as well as the diversity of candidates. So many businesses we work with are trying to attract people from outside of their particular industry, as we kind of alluded to up front. So we should be looking at a diverse range of candidate skills coming in the door, not to mention, the diverse lifestyles, ethnicities, genders and whatnot. So those are a few factors to look at here. So we've got a couple other questions which are fantastic. How do you come across as authentic? Okay, super important. This is where internal research comes to life. So don't just do internal research up front, but as you develop your employer brand and your messaging, make sure that you actually bring it together internally. So run some focus groups internally. This isn't something you should just do in a little creative closet and kind of roll it out on the world. That's the best way to kind of, lose your people. So make sure that you roll it out internally, but ask for feedback along the way. Now, little caveat, make sure that you have some guardrails along that feedback. Make sure that what you put forward is already, has been rooted in research and thought, but get feedback before you go loud and proud with your employer brand. Make sure that it's authentic and that it resonates. Okay, so that's a really, really critical way to do that. You can use surveys, and online tools are a great way to get a quantifiable sense, as well as doing like roundtables or town halls around that. because employees really do care about it. And your best employees are going to be the ones that are going to be the most vocal about your employer brand. And by the way, those are the ones you should leverage to become champions for your employer brands, because the best way to bring that story to life is through the stories of your people, because those are the stories that really bring that employer brand to life. People, of course, are your brand. Next question, what would be the first step in creating an employer brand for a startup with no established brand? That is a phenomenal question. So I would, it's interesting because we were, recently have been talking with a technology company, and there very much is the sense of, where do we begin? And we would argue that beginning the branding process from the inside out is really, really healthy. So if you recall the analogy up front, we talked about brands being a bridge between people and a company. First, we need to understand the company itself. So some foundational discovery or research work to understand who we are will be important for both your corporate brand as well as your employer brand, because we can't connect who you are with customers, for instance, unless we know who we are first. So in terms of the very first step, I think what would be really important is to get a feel of your culture. What is the vision of your organization? We need to look at what is the strategy of your organization. We need to get a sense for what do you value? How do you operate? Are you a vision-based organization, or are there a set of guiding principles or values that are really held dearly at the organization? We need to pin those things down first, or at least get a feel for them, and then test them internally. Make sure that whatever is found, that you again, through a survey, through town halls, through interviews with influential employees, and not just leadership, by the way, get out of the leadership circle, talk to your workaday employees, talk to those who interact with your customers day to day, to really gut check those things. So I would say first step is really identify your vision as an organization, make sure that the strategy, there is a clear strategy where you're going, and then what really drives you. What are your guiding principles or values, that are deeply espoused, that are unchanging, within your organization. And I would say lastly with that is it's not bad to start with your employer brand, because startups, the biggest thing they're facing is trying to get the right people on board. So that's a really critical thing to think about, and a good place to start. Next question is, our people say they love working here, but often we miss this opportunity to capture this sentiment. Wow, that's really good. Engagement right now is low in some of the major markets. How can the brand really help drive engagement improvements? That is a fantastic question. So I think we might have alluded to this, a little bit earlier, but it sounds like you probably have some really important people that could be champions for your employer brand. And I would really encourage you to look at really talking with them and understanding what's important, what are some of the surprises. You're going to find that there are some unsung heroes that are really telling your employer brand story. So I would say find and celebrate some of those people. And I would argue that they shouldn't just be fanboys or fangirls. You want to talk to people that are maybe, loud voices, that are maybe, not necessarily pulling in the same direction. Make sure that you engage with them and try to listen and understand where they're coming from. So that is an important part of getting a balanced perspective. But coming full circle to this question, I would say look at telling the stories of your people, not just inside the four walls of your organization, but their life outside of the organization as well. A great kind of benchmark for this would be the success of the Muse. Many of us are familiar with the site. What the Muse does well is really turn, an employer inside out. It tells the stories of individual people. It really humanizes the brand. So I think that's really what you want to do, is think about humanizing the brand, not making it overtly and too strongly about your employer brand, but allow that story to be told through people. So these are some fantastic questions. Alexa, any other questions we've had here? Okay. Well, thank you so much. You all have been a highly engaged group. You have our contact information. Well, I should say my contact information is right here up on the screen. Reach out. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you again for your time and your attention. If there are no other questions, we'll let you all get back to your days wherever you are in the world. And don't forget to join us next time, where we will dig into customer experience and get very, very kind of involved in what that looks like. So thank you. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye now.